Although it's often impossible to avoid addressing the criminal ingenuity of the spinner beanies in Pittsburgh and Seattle University hotshots and Hollywood Axis mentations. This might be more interesting. What I propose to do is we know one of the things that they're pulling is this idea that when they used to attack me as a child, they'd say, "You think you're better than us." Now we know from the Israelis that they're certainly no better than the Japanese, who testified they never had so much fun than bayoneting mountains of the living in Nanking. But you're not supposed to think you're better than Yoko Ono. She was the victim of World War II. How did this operate? It's based on an argument. K is C, even though K attacks C because man is man. It's the story of the nice kid who turns into a suicidal banshee in Stanley Kubrick's Far Out movie about the Vietnam War. Man is man is a Bertolt Brecht story. And you're supposed to go, oh my goodness, the feather in Yankee Doodle's cap was stolen from the last of the Mohicans, and so on and so forth. So what we see in Peter Gabriel's Supper's Ready, he puts on the crown of thorns and says, "I know a fireman that looks after the fire." So he's being irreverent. He's associating himself with the Antichrist, the crown of thorns on the devil. And he was married to Queen Elizabeth's secretary's daughter, which means that he was working this out with Franklin Graham. Was in on the Michael Foucault, Sean Straub issue. And you have Banana Yoshimoto processing the transgender status quo in the elite modern literature success circle, who come up with things like diversity without inclusion and stuff. I mean, it's Japanese grabbing their old racism back through calling it subversion of the dominant paradigm. In other words, it's a form of anti-racism to be deemed the best of the best and engage in genocidal pussyball. And of course, Ichiro Suzuki would admire this word then, because he's not real concerned about the masses in a place like Gaza. And he showed up here in 2001. So, they also have this thing this axe to grind about Hiroshima. Buto is called the Dance of Death because it's dark and sort of brings to life the grisly and hoary movements of the victims of the atomic bomb. So the Japanese have quite a story to conveyance in this. Now, 2001 through 2007 may seem like a long time ago, but it was presentation of the arc of colors. It was the way that you could be forgiven for believing that John Kennedy, the conservative extremist working with Trump, was somehow similar to JFK because they had the same name. And Rosa Clemente, whose namesake was the um, joke that was on me when Barack Obama triumphed over the symbol of life, the best of the best, Midori Goto, in the name of John Lennon, was somehow made Icho like Roberto, who you may not know this, but he was killed trying to help people like the children of Gaza. It was an earthquake in Nicaragua. So, I mean, Edgar Martinez will have to iron out the details with his publisher's company. You know, he can try on the various spinner. It's only past Edgar spinner thingy, which um, so the momentum, it is a snowball effect, to use the vocabulary favored by Greta. You might consider it sort of a slow moving snowball, because when they castrated me in 2007, it was for something that never happened in 1979. That's a pretty long rolling snowball. And who knows? Gail Burstyn will die of old age before they admit that the evidence shows that Reagan was in on the whole thing all along. It's a slowly moving snowball. But they call it momentum because the slowly moving snowball allows them to poison the deaf white suck in the mouth, release COVID, and then slowly they turn step by step and move into Gaza. So the momentum of the Texas queers who seized the day with Midori Goto is a snowball, a slowly moving snowball. But I guess it's just self-respect that reminds me that in 1993, when I recognized that there was a problem with Gail Burstyn, I did go to the police and the courts about it. They adopted the claim that it couldn't be what I said and they didn't have to look at the evidence that Seattle used to ban me from school. And God help us all, rip or murder Shannon Harps, because Tony Levin is an honorary the black man on account that Leslie Katz was Jewish and Ian Widemaker insulted Gail Burstyn. And you have to connect the dots because everything is connectivity in the shadow of the walrus. And, they could have gotten on the phone and called the sheriff of Allegheny County, as I did. I asked him, did somebody start a rumor that I was a date rapist? He said there's no allegation on file to any such representation of you. I mean, would they put a bimbo in the bed of a girl who they thought was actually... No. They knew that I wouldn't have gone out with her if I had known she was a virgin. Quite to the contrary of the claim that they're making. I would not have, because I was sort of taken back. And if you play back the pimp spy cam that they got tons of money for at Sotheby. You'll see that I was taken back and looked at her sort of as though something suspicious might be going on when it's such an important mindset that Tony Levin has brokered with Toon that it's just deceit after deceit. I mean, how can they go for 40 years of this kind of thing? They kept me out of school for 12 years. And when I went back to school, I finished 4 years at the top of my class. This was somebody who Seattle poisoned and claimed could never succeed. How can they have the gall to studiously evaluate splitting hairs, these kinds of allegations that they're making, while denying any detail that would incriminate them as knowing what was in the script and refusing to proceed? Saying when the evidence was clearly, thoroughly persuasive that the letters needed to be secured and evaluated by police and lawyers, that was clear. It was perfectly crystal clear that the evidence was all in my favor. They said, we don't have to look because we know it's not true from what you're saying. And then banned me from school as a predetermined failure and troublemaker. And then not even apologizing when I passed with honors. And the society, the civics people are justifying it as a curiosity, a madcap curiosity of Smithsonian social media, I guess, where all of these people refuse to admit that they're fascinated and watching secretly. And it's an absurd hustle that was allowed to happen. If you look at the evidence, you'll see that Register snuck into Pitt News and put up espionage signs that were the same style of espionage signs that set up the Pussy Ball hustle with Lady Panther and Dixon and don't know who in German Green Party on my father's obituary with something about injecting values. And then this whole song and dance about Will Zell being a leader of the JDL because he advocates for Joseph Goebbels while talking about transforming the human race by injecting the blood, surrounding my name with positive and negative signs. And Seattle says there's nothing to that. We're building momentum. See why we did it to the queer bait? We were building momentum for the good guys to crush the children of Gaza. 14,000 children are on the brink of dying of starvation, so Nelson can get away with claiming that child abuse is a provincial norm in Pennsylvania and white children being tortured isn't special. 14,000 children starving to death so that these imbeciles can get away with their honchoisms. And then they have the audacity to speak of me as suffering a fool to live. A fool. Because what? Because I went to them with the evidence expecting them to look at it? It's abnormal.